People that grew up in tough neighborhoods, what are the most horrifying things you have witnessed? My best friend was killed by a stray bullet at a party, about 5 feet from me. I didn't see it, we were both running, but I heard him fall. I actually laughed because I thought he tripped and fell. SoCal in the 90s was pretty rough. I grew up in DC and saw a woman get shot in the face while walking her dog. It happened across the street and I sought cover in the house I was walking past, which was risky in itself, but I was scared shitless. Luckily, it was a nice young couple who lived there and it was chill. So terrifying, edited to add Anacostia specifically, like Stanton and Douglas. A car frantically trying to pull back into the street with a guy running alongside stabbing the driver repeatedly through the open window. Pulling out of a parking lot and heard nearby gunfire. Looked to my left and saw a man backing away from 2 other men while he was shooting both of them multiple times. My friend's mom, frantically bursting in the front door holding a laundry basket, methed out of her mind, covered in blood. Turned out she had just stabbed her husband in a psychotic rage. The knife was hidden in the bottom of the basket and she wanted us to dispose of it for her. I was out at a bar with my dad and uncles one weekend evening. I was 10 or so. One of my uncles got into it with this guy because he was acting like a dick. My uncle, not the other guy. After the bar closed, the drama followed us into the parking lot. These dudes were now threatening my dad because he was with my uncle and to drunk people. That is not at all a ridiculous leap in logical reasoning. I was sitting in the front seat and my dad got out of the car. I don't remember if he was pulled out or got out on his own. He turns around to get back into the car, and I see a huge blade drawn across his abdomen, barely missing him by possibly a centimeter at most. Someone had fortunately pulled my dad back at that very instant, or his guts would have been lying all over the seat in front of me. Whoever it was that pulled my dad back was a friendly bartender or club owner, someone we knew, and they managed to get the group disturbed enough to get my dad in the car so he could drive home. That wasn't quite the worst thing I'd seen, but it is disturbing to think how close I came to watching my dad being gutted in front of me. I saw a guy run up on another guy and stab him right in the neck while a police cruiser was parked within a few feet. The whole scene was wild. Less horrifying than just straight brutal. A couple guys my age, 15 or so, got into a fight. One of them got the upper hand and knocked the other guy down. He just sat on the guy's chest and arms and fed him punch after punch right to the face. I remember the punches were slow, unhurried, and he threw them in wide arcs rather than straight on. It sounded awful. Like wet meat. The other guy was fucked up. He was probably knocked out after the first few, at least I hope he was. It probably didn't go on that long, but it felt like forever. I don't remember what happened after that, but the guy who got beat never came around downtown again. There is nothing worse than kids around 7 years old snuffing glue with toluene from plastic bags. Many of them just suffocated during the process, and those who survive it well. Maybe survival is not the best option if you sniff glue. I got hit by a car and left in a ditch for 8-ish hours on the way home from school in winter. No one even looked for me. First week of high school. 2 kids are fighting near the school off campus. Another kid jumps in what looked like an attempt to break up the fight. Gets stabbed by another bystander multiple times in the face, neck, chest, and back, and pushed into the storm drain. Absolutely horrifying hearing him moaning and crying as he lied there dying. I can still hear it 30 years later. When I was 17, I was accosted by a 64-year-old man who wanted to smell my feet. Apparently 20 was the going rate. A direct neighbor stabbed his ex-wife to death near his child's school. While the kid was watching, I only realized when I came home and the whole building was full of police investigators. I spent 2 years living directly next to that lunatic. I didn't live in a bad area, but I worked in the projects of East New York. I saw a guy standing outside of someone's apartment with his bike. The owner of the apartment opened the door and without saying a word they both immediately started throwing punches. The fight only lasted a few seconds before the guy who was waiting outside the door pulled out a gun and shot the owner of the apartment 5 times in his chest. After he shot him, he grabbed his bike and walked away slowly like nothing happened. The man who got shot was also really calm. He took a knee for a few seconds, stood up and took a few steps forward before he collapsed and died in front of the elevator. It affected me at the time, but not so much anymore. I just couldn't imagine dying in that filthy hallway covered in piss. I couldn't imagine that being the last thing I saw as I left this world. Very thankful I don't work in that area anymore. Left our flat to go to school. There was a guy just sat on the steps with a large knife machete wedged in his head and a fair amount of blood. Next door neighbor overdosed outside our flat in a suicide attempt. My mom, she was a nurse, saved her life. A guy in another block of flats with an air rifle was taking shots at kids playing outside. I almost got hit. Heard the pellet whiz past my head. Was mugged at a local fun fair. We were so poor I had no money to take. Was bullied badly at school and someone tried to slit my throat with a small knife. My jacket saved me from any injury, but I needed a new jacket which we couldn't afford, so just had to keep wearing it. Lots more, but they stand out. Wester Hales, Edinburgh. I was 14 and visiting my dad after he had gotten out of prison. We went to a friend's house of his and the wife was having a full-blown meth-induced break from reality. She started stabbing her husband while my dad was trying to get the knife away from her. While that was going on, I was doing my best to cover their young daughter's head, tucked away in a corner, so that she couldn't see nor hear what was happening. Grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Saw multiple people get shot and killed. Had my truck shot at once while I was driving downtown. Bullet went straight through the bed. Didn't grow up in the area, but it was my first apartment at 18. Dude ran up and point blank shot a guy in the back of the head and ran off. That apartment fucking sucked, but it was $400 a month. I grew up in Belfast, Ireland when the Troubles were still raging. I could write a book with all the crazy things I witnessed. Constant riots, gun battles, sectarian murder gangs, bombs all over, army and militant police on the streets, as well as paramilitaries. You had to have your wits about you. It made me hyper-aware of my surroundings, even to this day, hardwired. A simple wrong turn into the wrong area could literally cost you your life. So glad that shit is in the past. It was an insane environment to grow up in. Teenagers visiting another teenager's house. They had a beef with. They wandered in the back door with baseball bats while the mom was cooking a roast, pushed her out of the way, and beat the other teenager a few times with their bats in his own lounge. My parents opened a restaurant called Stalex in the early to late 90s in Dorchester. I was probably 5 or 6 sitting in the back booth with my older brother doing homework after school. We hear the pop pop, the window shatters, and I see the guy that was in front of the counter jump over it and land on top of my mom. The bullet lodged in the door frame to the kitchen about a foot from my mom. Dude heard the gun go off and immediately jumped over the counter and protected my mom. I don't even remember who he was, but whoever you were, thank you for ignoring your own safety and protecting my mom. That bullet hole was there until the new owner remodeled like a decade later. I have a few. A group of youths on the street by my apartment got into it, resulting in one young man being stabbed to death with a screwdriver. Then his friends pick him up, try to get him conscious while all that's doing is shaking his blood out everywhere. Street cordoned off, as an older gentleman was hanging out of his apartment window with a crossbow and a shotgun, threatening people who were just passing by. Came home from vacation to find an axe embedded in my wall, having clearly been thrown through my back window from an unknown person. The local store below our flats would get robbed weekly by different people until some genius decided it'd be easier to drill their way down into it from the apartment above and just haul out all of the alcohol and cigarettes in one go. This is all one small section of street I could see from my apartment, never mind neighborhood. My mom's friend was coming over one night. We heard lots of noise and sirens and found his bike on our front steps. He was murdered out back on someone else's doorstep and knew he was being followed. Ditching the bike and dying somewhere else was a consideration. To be fair, though, I saw none of this, just the random police presence that night. I grew up just outside Cambridge in England, a rather posh university city with lots of gorgeous buildings and a long history. I have never seen worse fights than I saw in my late teens, early 20s at the end of nights out in Cambridge city center. I was knocked unconscious and curb stomped for not letting a guy go in front of me at an ATM. I saw a massive fight involving 20 people. One guy took a piece of scaffolding from one of the market stalls and hit a woman in the stomach because she was pregnant with another dude's kid or something like that. That same fight I saw 2 guys repeatedly stamping on a guy's head with blood pooling into a drain. Horrible. All in the lovely city of Cambridge. Crazy. I once saw a dead body floating by the river pretty close to a popular shopping mall while waiting for the bus. It was so early in the morning too, and I was on my way to school. Still shakes me to my core whenever I think about it. My friend was walking his GFS little dog once in a bad part of PGH. He heard white boy before just being shot at. He only got shot in the hand.